I think we probably will get going. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar, just to make sure that you're all in the right place, is I can still drive, but my kids say no. And I am Val Matson, and joining me from the Dancing Sky Area Agency on Aging is Stephanie Osnes and Connie Traska. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Dancing Sky, just a brief overview. We are one of 7 area agencies on aging in the state of Minnesota. We serve 21 counties in the Northwest Minnesota area, and our mission is to work with rural communities to help older adults stay in control of their choices. Some of the highlights we'll be learning today is the importance of maintaining independence and community mobility, how health can affect our driving, safety behind the wheel, and what does comprehensive driving evaluation entail. I'm going to go over a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker. Please make sure your mic is muted and put any questions that you might have in the chat, and we will ask that questions as we go along. Someone's going to be monitoring that. This presentation will be recorded and available on the Dancing Sky website. So now we'll get to the presenter, and I'd like to introduce her, and we are excited today to have her. It'll be very interesting. Joining us today is Joy Tanber. She is an occupational therapist and a driver rehab professional. She feels it's critical for people to maintain as much independence as possible and while keeping the community safe. She has a passion working with driver rehab, and this passion and the desire to work provide services to the people of rural communities inspired her to the DAC-MIN, M-I-N-N, driving evaluation. And it's my pleasure now to introduce you to Joy.
Thank you, Val. Okay, there. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to join and speak with you about one of my passion areas. This is my contact information here. But I'm going to kind of move on a little bit, and I'm going to pass this one. This is a presentation that I made for another group that was more student oriented. So I know that everybody's on mute but me. So I want you to think, what does driving mean to you? And if it's okay and people can chime in and give me some things that they would say what driving means.
Freedom.
Freedom.
Independence.
Independence.
People said independence in the chat, my life.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think another thing that is really important with driving is to help people maintain that ability to participate in life's activities. And so as we age, obviously our overall well-being and physical being starts to diminish. And so we all have this innate sense that we want to maintain that independence, which is a critical part of our being human. So the other thing I want you to think about is, what was your first car? I'm guessing some of you had some pretty cool cars back in the day. A Dodge Duster, 69 Dodge Dart.
I had a Dodge Shadow.
Dodge Shadow. Dodge was big, huh? 1954 Plymouth. I love it. So my guess is even the 96 Honda probably didn't have a lot of the things on it today, but I know none of the previous ones did. So they didn't have backup cameras. They didn't have adaptive cruise control. They didn't have lane departure assist. You know, none of these things that have made our ability to drive safely better Although I have some mixed emotions with all of those because number one, they're mechanical. Number two, people become way too dependent on those conveniences that have been put into our vehicles. So mixed emotions from me in terms of that. A little bit more about me is, oh, I just looked, a Mustang convertible and a Model A and Model T. Those are cool. But I am an occupational therapist. I graduated from UND in 1984 and have worked several areas of the country before coming back to North Dakota 5 years ago to spend some time with my mom before she passed. So I have not regretted that decision, although a couple of these winters have been pretty wicked. A few years ago, we had the same situation with my mom that maybe many of you did or are having right now with your loved ones. And that is, there were 7 kids in my family, so there were 8 opinions, because my dad was already gone, as to whether mom should continue to drive or not. She had macular degeneration and Parkinson's both. And a lot of discord among the family, which makes it very difficult. But it finally took mom having an accident where she totaled her car, but nobody was hurt, fortunately. But that's what it took for her to go, okay, you guys are right. I should stop driving. My goal is to not let people get to that point. I don't want them to have an accident and have that be their wake-up call. We want to prevent things from happening. Now I can't get my screen to move. So you've all probably been like this guy right here, going, oh my gosh, what did they just do? I can't believe this person did that. We've all experienced it. We all experience it every single day, I'm guessing. And so that's kind of why I'm here. You know, older drivers, and I'm going to preface this with, I work with all ages of drivers. I am focusing more on older drivers simply because that's the greatest majority of our clientele. But older driver crashes are associated with physical, visual, and or cognitive effects of aging. And unfortunately, as we age, all of those things start to decline to a certain extent. Some of these individuals might be feeling like I did this morning as I was driving to Grand Forks, like I'm sitting in a fog and you can't see anything. Or some people may end up going the wrong way. They may feel stuck in a desert or stuck in the mud. Or they have all this other visual stimulation going on that can cause a lot of anxiety when they're behind the wheel. So as an occupational therapist, I believe that community mobility is critical for our overall physical and emotional health. And the reason that I say that is because when somebody loses that ability to just pick up and go, they don't have that freedom or independence anymore, then they tend to just start to shrivel up because they sit in their home or their apartment, they watch television, they don't go out and participate with everything. And so our physical and emotional health definitely can decline when that happens. So the most common form of community mobility is driving. And driving is also the most complex form of community mobility. So it's something we all want to do, but it's not necessarily something we're all safe at. Just a couple other quick statistics. And this came from the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, NHTSA, in 2019. 54 million people in the US are over the age of 65. Older drivers are 54% more likely to be killed in crashes on rural roadways versus urban roadways. And what do we have in North Dakota, Minnesota, especially in this area? It's all rural. And so the chances of an accident happening or someone being killed are high. 3 out of 4 fatal crashes involving older drivers occur during the day. Any idea why that might be? I'll tell you. That is because a lot of times by the time people get to the point where they are starting to have some issues, they've already started to self-limit. So a lot of them aren't driving at night simply because they know their vision isn't as good. They know it's harder to see those deer when they come flying out of the ditch, that kind of thing. And then 3 out of 4 fatal crash, or 2 out of 3 fatal crashes involving older individuals also involve other vehicles. I have to take a drink, sorry. So a couple other statistics that I won't go all the way into, that you can just look at that briefly. This is the statistics from 2020, highlighting some of the motor vehicle crash highlights and what the cost of those motor vehicle crashes just in the United States. And that comes from the National Safety Council. So motor vehicle accidents are very expensive. And we don't always stop and think about all of the other ramifications. It's not just you've had an accident, you crashed into another car, everybody's fine, but there's the insurance is going to go up. Somebody might get a ticket. There's emotional trauma that happens with it. So lots of different things that we don't really think about with our little fender benders, but it can happen. So what do we do? What are the questions? I don't know if this group deals a lot with traumatic incidents or more progressive diseases, but just a general thing in terms of what kind of time frame a person should or could return to driving after that traumatic incident, like an amputation, is going to depend a lot on which side and which extremity that they've had an injury to. How's the wound healing? Are they using a prosthetic? Are they at the point where they can transfer and they can do whatever? So a lot of things depend on what's happening physically with that person. If someone's had a stroke or a head injury, again, it depends on the level of severity, where the location of the insult is, and what kind of physical and cognitive impairments that person might have. All of these situations may be somebody that requires adaptive equipment to drive, a left foot accelerator or hand controls, something like that, in which case we would need to do training with them. In terms of a stroke, it's generally recommended, if it's a mild stroke, that somebody doesn't drive for at least 3 months post-stroke so the brain can heal, but it might be up to 1 to 2 years before they're ready to start driving. So it's a longer time frame than any of us as family members or the individual really want, but for safety reasons, that's kind of where it's at. For somebody driving with progressive diseases such as dementia, MS, Parkinson's, arthritis, all of those types of things, it depends on the stage of the disease process. If they're in an early to moderate phase, they may be able to continue driving without restrictions for a period of time. The physical impairments are going to be the same as any of the other diagnoses that I mentioned. If the person is in a moderate phase of their disease process, maybe they will have to drive with restrictions, and that could be no nighttime driving, no driving within 20-mile radius of their home. They must wear glasses, all those kinds of things. If it's somebody with the progressive disease, then they will most likely need follow-up evaluations at regular intervals to assure their safety. And that could be anywhere from 6 months to a year, because we know that they're all going to progress and the deficits will increase for sure. Some of the things that we need to be able to perform, or things that are part of us that we need for driving, is our vision. And that's visual acuity, which is how close and how far away you see. Visual field is how far you can see off to the side without turning your head. Contrast sensitivity is another vision that I test. And with that, I explain in our area in the summer, the grass is green and the trees are green and the bushes are green and the street signs are green. Can this person identify that street sign when everything in the background is the same? On the flip side of that, in the wintertime, everything's covered in white. So the road is white, the ditches are white, the berms are white, everything is white. Can you tell the difference between the road and that shoulder so that you don't go in the ditch? So that's what contrast sensitivity entails. And that is not something that is a requirement for either North Dakota or Minnesota, but it's something that as a therapist, I feel is very important that we need to address. Visual acuity and visual field both have minimum standards that a person has to meet. We also have to have good motor skills. So strength, range of motion, coordination, that type of thing. And we have to have good cognition. So how is the person's ability to make decisions? And they problem solve? What is their ability to maintain a calm demeanor when they're behind the wheel? All those kinds of things. And then we also look at ADLs and IADLs. Can this person multitask? Because if you're behind the wheel of a car, it is constantly multitasking, constantly being aware of what you're surrounding, what's happening in your surroundings. So I use this it's a puzzle. I use this a lot with my clients because I will guarantee you there are very few people that I work with that do not think that they're excellent drivers. Even though there's scratches on the car, dents in the mailbox, it usually wasn't their fault. Somebody ran into them in the parking lot or whatever. Somebody sideswiped them. But I will take little pieces out of this and relate it to what they do with driving. So if the windshield of your car is missing and you still drive, yes, it's not the safest thing to do, but you could still drive for a period of time. And so if you have a problem with your vision, does that mean that you're automatically done driving? No, but you do have to meet those basic requirements for the state in order to stay driving. Same thing, I might take out one of the tires and say, if you have problems with, or if I take the tire out and I say it's flat, can you drive with the flat tire? You can. It's not the wisest thing to do. Same thing as if you have some limited motion or strength in one or all of your extremities. That doesn't necessarily mean you can't continue to drive, but it does mean that we have to address those things and find some adaptations that can help you be safer. I'm not going to go into that much. The thing with the OT generalist and the driver rehab specialist is that the OT generalist is that person you're going to find in any of your rehab departments, whether it's inpatient or outpatient. They are critical to get this conversation started because they're the ones that are seeing the individual along with the physicians and the nurses and the PTs. But sometimes it's the OT that is asking the person more about how are they getting around? What are they doing in order to stay independent or to stay involved in their community? So they may make a recommendation to the physician or the patient and then refer to a driving rehab specialist. The specialist has advanced training in driver rehab. And there are actually 3 levels of training. The highest is a certified driving rehab specialist. We have one in the state of North Dakota, and she works at Sanford in Fargo. She's very busy, and there's a backlog for her. I am the only driving rehab professional, and that's one step down from the certified driving rehab specialist. And then the next level below me is a driving rehab specialist. So we each have different levels of training to actually work behind the wheel with the client. I am the only mobile driving rehab person in either state. So it makes it kind of hard because right now, if anybody was to go to see either of these other people that have training in North Dakota, and even let's see, closest to here is Fergus Falls. They have a certified driving rehab specialist. Courage Kenny out of Minneapolis has several satellite clinics where they have driving rehab specialists. Most of them are certified. And then up in Duluth, there's one CVRS. So we're very limited in this region as to who can deal with these people appropriately and make sure that they're safe behind the wheel. So when I do my eval, I might find that this person may need further PT/OT speech. I had somebody a couple months ago that I did his evaluation and found that his vision did not even come close to meeting the standards, but he had not had an eye exam for like 3 years. So he went to the eye doctor, got new glasses, is functioning at a point where he can now meet those standards and we can proceed with his evaluation. So I frequently am referring people back to other specialists, make sure that they're getting all that they need. Any questions up to this point? Okay. So what's involved in a comprehensive driving evaluation? There are basically 2 parts. The first is, we'll say 3 parts. The first is what I call a clinical assessment. Even though I do it in the person's home, it still looks at all of the clinical type things that you might be assessing in a doctor's office or a therapy clinic. So I look at their medical history, and that's includes what their driving history is. I also look at medications because there are medications that can cause drowsiness, that can cause agitation, those kinds of things. And if they're having any of that, then their safety behind the wheel could be questioned. I also look at their physical status, their range of motion, their strength, coordination, sensation. Do they have the ability to function in those areas, or do we need to look at something different? I do a lot of cognitive testing, and I don't know if you're familiar with any of these, but they're big tests within the medical community with neuropsych. OT, that kind of thing. So a lot of cognitive testing. I look at their vision, and I also am able to assess their reaction time and coordination with moving from the gas to the brake. So that's what we're going to do clinically. Prior to that, I need a prescription from the physician, and I need the most recent visit notes from the physician and or the therapist. And then also, like every place, intake paperwork. So if they do fairly well with the clinical assessment, then we proceed to behind the wheel. And the pushback I get with this is we have to use my vehicle because it's been adapted. So I have a brake on my side, so I have a little control. I've been trained to drive from the passenger side. Again, if there's ever a chance or a situation where I need to take control of the vehicle, we can do that. There's also a huge liability and insurance aspect of doing behind the wheel evaluations that were not covered in someone else's vehicle. So in that behind the wheel, I'm going to take them into familiar and unfamiliar areas. I want to be sure that they're really truly aware of their surroundings. Are they recognizing the street signs, and are they following the street signs? You all do know that octagon shaped red sign with the word stop on it, that doesn't mean you really have to stop. That's just a suggestion. That's what I get told anyway. And the speed limit is just a suggestion. And the lines down the middle of the road, it's just a suggestion. If nobody's coming, it's okay. So those are things that I'm looking at. How do they do with making decisions? And do they have control of the vehicle? How smoothly are they accelerating or decelerating? Can they pass a car if we're on the highway? Are they able to merge into traffic? What's their speed control? All those types of things I'm going to look at. And if the person has some cognitive deficits, I'm definitely going to be trying to see if I can get them kind of disoriented so that they have to figure out how do we get back. Sadly, we have a lot of individuals that once they start with some dementia signs and symptoms, they also start to have problems with knowing where they're at and how do they problem solve out of that situation. I mentioned earlier about adaptive equipment, that there are certain diagnoses that may require adaptive driving equipment. So that could be your stroke or your amputation. For example, we have a person that has had a right leg amputation. So they don't have the ability to safely use the manufacturer's accelerator. I've been in contact with different driving schools in the state and talked about some of these things. And there was a person, I will not say what large city they were in, but we talked about amputations. And he has worked with a gentleman that had a right leg prosthetic. And since he was not able to safely use the prosthetic with the accelerator and the brake, the driving instructor said, well, can you take that thing off? And yes, and they threw it in the back seat. And then he taught the person how to drive using his left foot on the original equipment. So just sitting in your seats where you're at, I want you to envision your gas and brake. And I want you to reach over with your left foot to where that gas pedal would be. And just see how that feels to go from the gas and then back to the brake, which would be more centered. Using the equipment in that fashion is not a long-term solution for that situation, because doing that more than a couple of times to get through that stress fracture in the foot, you're going to cause long-term problems with ankle, knee, hip, and maybe even back. So really looking at what is appropriate for that individual is really important. So that person, I would train them to use a left foot accelerator. So it's a piece of adaptive equipment that's installed in the vehicle, and they just switch. So they're using their left foot, but the accelerator is now on the left side of the brake. And I'll show you a picture of that later, but somebody might need hand controls. They've had a stroke, so their whole right side does not function well. So that individual might need hand controls in order to be able to drive safely. Any type of adaptive equipment, the person needs to be trained in the proper use. Once they're proficient, they need to test with the state to obtain, I put endorsement, but it's actually a restriction. So they will test with the state as well. And I usually will let them use my vehicle for that, because I have a problem with people putting out money to get equipment and have it installed only to fail their driving test with the state. So they use my vehicle in order to test so they can get that restriction on their license. And then we proceed to getting the proper equipment and getting it properly installed. So, and the adaptive equipment requires training. The adaptive equipment needs to be permanent in the driver's vehicle. So basically, it's not generally something that you're going to take in and take out. I had a client who just thought he could make his own hand controls and just move them to whatever vehicle he felt he wanted to drive that day. Well, that plays a big role in that equipment no longer being safe when it's taken out and put in and that kind of thing. So it's really important that the equipment be obtained and installed by a certified and reputable dealer, because there are guarantees and there are liability issues that go along with it, for both myself as well as the equipment installer. The medical review board in North Dakota told me about a client one time who had not gone through any evaluation or training with equipment. Nobody ever talked about what was appropriate for this person. And the person arrives at the state to have their behind the road test done. Well, they had gotten some hand controls, I don't know where from, and these hand controls were duct taped in the vehicle. So can you tell me how safe that's going to be? So just a real critical thing, that you don't just order equipment off of Amazon or eBay. We need to make sure that that's coming from a certified dealer, to make sure that there aren't any liabilities if something were to happen. So my job can go from humor to horror really fast. And it did just recently. I was working with a younger driver, and we were going to start doing a little bit heavier traffic. This is someone who'd never driven before. Cerebral palsy, early 20s, 2 college degrees, was working as a marketing director at a company. And he really wanted to learn how to drive. Who in their early 20s doesn't want to drive? And so he'd been doing really well. We kept progressing and progressing. And one day we were going to turn down onto Broadway. We were up in North Fargo. We were going to turn down onto Broadway. So still fairly quiet, but there was more than one lane of traffic, and he got a little bit excited. And up over the curb we went, and we kept going towards this light pole. And fortunately, my training took over and I was able to steer us away and get the brake engaged. And I kid you not, the side passenger mirror was this far from the light pole. So things can change in an instant. And that is one of the reasons you want somebody who's had the training to be in the car with that person. So what's the next step? This person has gone through their clinical assessment and their driving behind the wheel assessment. Am I going to give them hope that things are good, or am I going to cause a lot of despair and angst with the person? We sit down and we have an outcomes discussion. This person may be able to continue driving without restrictions. Maybe they can continue driving with restrictions, such as I talked about it earlier, daylight driving only, no inclement weather, limited radius around their home, that kind of thing. We may hold driving until they get back to see the therapist or another physician to make sure that they're getting the optimum return that they can. And then we talk about if the person needs to retire from driving. I like to talk to them about the 3 R's. Number 1 is remove access. And, you know, we live in a rural farming communities. I had one family who they had taken the keys from the car so that dad couldn't drive. Well, dad had dementia, but he had enough wherewithal to call the dealership and say, I've lost my keys. Can you make me a new one? So they did. The family's like, oh my gosh. So then they decided, we'll take the battery out of the car. Well, he calls Napa Auto Parts and says, can you deliver me a new battery? Somebody stole my battery. So needless to say, they brought me in, and we did have to do evaluation. We had to make some consolations there. But in his case, removing access, maybe the best thing would have been to give his vehicle to one of his grandkids that needed to get to work, or, you know, something like that. Replacing all community mobility needs. So if this person isn't driving themselves, they still need to get to the doctor and the dentist and the hairdresser and church and the grocery store and coffee with the boys in the morning. You know, they still need to have those kinds of things. And so how can we work on making sure that they're still participating? And that might be talking with the family and setting up a schedule. So every 2 weeks, Val will take mom to the hairdresser to get her hair done. And Stephanie is going to take the responsibility for getting mom to all of her doctor appointments. And Lauren is going to take the person to the grocery store every week. So setting up a schedule so that the person doesn't have to ask. Because again, we're all from the mindset that we don't want to ask for help. And if they have to ask somebody to take them to the hairdresser, chances are they're not going to go. And then that whole physical and emotional well-being starts to decline. So creating a schedule for family members, or teaching that person how to get on the bus, or how to schedule dial a ride or something like that, so that they're still able to get out and do things. And the last thing I like to talk to the family about is remember the fun. Because mom doesn't want to just go to the hairdresser or the doctor or the grocery store. Mom still wants to go and play bridge with the girls. Dad wants to go have coffee with the boys in the morning. So just spontaneously calling your loved one up and saying, you know what? How about we go out for ice cream today? Or it's a beautiful sunny day on a Sunday. Let's take a drive out and look at the crops. And so those things are going to be really important as well. And I like to have the family members involved in both the clinical part of the testing and the outcomes discussion. The reason I like them in the clinical part of the testing is because, number one, I'm the lady that's going to take their driver's license away, even though that's not my goal. But also, if they have any cognitive issues or concerns with losing that license, they're maybe not going to be completely honest with me, or they're not going to remember things. So when I'm talking about their driving history, and I say, have you had any accidents or fender benders or something like that? Oh, no, never, haven't ever had anything. And then the family member says, well, you backed into that car at the grocery store. Well, they shouldn't have been backing out at the same time I was, so things like that. The other thing is, I always ask the client and the family what we're doing. Why are we doing this test? And most of the time, it's, well, my family doesn't want me to drive. I had one gentleman who said, my girls don't want me to drive. One of his daughters was there and she said, well, that's not true. She says, I don't think he has a problem and he's a fine driver. It's my sister that doesn't want him to drive. So my thoughts are, okay, this is going to reinforce one way or the other. And as we proceeded through all of that clinical testing, the cognition, the vision, the musculoskeletal, and he was doing very poorly on everything. She could see that. And I lost count how many times she got up and walked away from the table to dry her tears. And after we were done, she looked at me, she goes, I had absolutely no idea that he was that bad. And so as you're with these people all the time, sometimes you don't see the decline. They're very good at hiding it. I had another gentleman who has Parkinson's, and I'd spoken to the Parkinson's support group one time, and he gave me a hard time about picking on old people, even though it just so happened that most Parkinson's people are elderly. So he gave me a hard time, and a few months later, his daughter called me up and said, you met us at the Parkinson's support group. You probably don't remember us, et cetera, et cetera. And turns out I did. But they wanted me to come and evaluate because he'd been told by 2 physicians that he was no longer supposed to drive. And he was still driving. The family couldn't get him to stop. And so they asked me to come, and I said, fine. So I asked them to get the referral and the most recent visit notes. And in that note, the doctor writes, it's fine that he can have the driving evaluation, but I'm not going to change my mind. And I said that to the family. I went, it's not going to make a difference what I find. And they're like, no, we need somebody else. I'm like, okay. So I went and I did that eval, and he was another one that did horribly. I would not take him in the car simply because I don't want to put my life in danger. And it would have been. But I was able to sit and go through each one of those tests and tell him how it related to being behind the wheel of the car and why I didn't feel like he should drive anymore. And this man is about 6'4", and I'm about 5'4", 5'5". So we're standing and he's looking down at me and saying, so how much did this cost me? And I told him, and he said, it's the best money I've spent in a long time. And his daughter's jaw dropped, and mine kind of did. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, there's not a single person, not my family, not the doctors, that were able to tell me why I shouldn't drive. They just told me not to drive. And so all of these things go together. And somebody has written in the chat section about family dynamics being hard to navigate. And that is so true. Because when you're coming up with the family needs to try to get to the point where the dad or mom's not driving, or grandma, grandpa, whoever, it is really hard because there's a lot of conflict that can arise for something like this. And I just want to show this. I don't know if you can see it, but this is a booklet put out by the Hartford Company in combination with NHTSA, National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, and I believe AOTA, the American Occupational Therapy Association, also had input in this. But this particular one is Family Conversations with Older Drivers. So it's a great way to get started with talking with your loved one. And the Hartford has, I think it's 4 booklets all together with different topics, but those are excellent and they're free resources. So I would highly recommend that if you're having some issues, whether you're a provider or a caregiver, I think those are very, very helpful. When I stay too long on a slide, it doesn't want to progress. We won't worry about it. So biggest thing is, my goal as a therapist is to keep these people safe. And whether that is allowing them to continue to drive with restrictions, or whether that is recommending that they retire from driving and then helping the client and the family determine how do we replace those community mobility needs. My goal going into any evaluation is that I want to keep that person independent. So I always go in hoping that we're going to have a positive outcome. But sadly, that's not always the case. I was going to show you guys some pictures of the left foot accelerator and stuff, but I can't. Oh, here we go.
There we go.
So these are just some equipment that's out there and available. The one on the left-hand side is called a handy bar or handy grip. If you look in the one that says easy to insert, that's how I like to use this the most. So you just stick it in that latch on the car, and it gives the person something to push up on as they're either getting into the car or getting out of the car. So it just helps with that whole transfer status. And also do the other things that are shown in that picture, but transferring in and out is one of the things I like best about it. On the right-hand side, this is called a seatbelt grabber. So if the person has a little bit of limited shoulder motion, this gives them something a little bit longer to reach, so it's not as hard to get hold of that seatbelt. The one on the left here is a device that helps them unlock the seatbelt just by pushing down with their whole hand instead of trying to push with the thumb or the finger. And then this one helps to hold that seatbelt in an upright position. You know how they fall down between the seats or whatever. This helps hold that up in position so it's easier to connect with it. On the left is a swivel seat. Again, just helps the person get in and out of the car easier. On the right, there are mirrors that are wider that can give that person a more all-encompassing view. And then over here, this is that left foot accelerator that I was talking about. Can you guys see my mouse? So here is the original brake. This is the original gas pedal. Here's the new gas pedal. This is a block so that the person can't go from the original brake over to the gas. And we train on how do you go from one to the other. And then this is just one set of hand controls that the individual is using. There are also electronic devices that get a little bit more high tech. Now, what questions do you have? I can try to get the PowerPoint to Connie or Stephanie. I'm not sure how to do that, but it'll be on the recording, right? So you should be able to record it and get more of that too. Did my gentleman that hopped the curb get another chance? Yeah, we were in training. I was actually training him to drive. And so, was it bad judgment on my part that I started him into a little heavier traffic? It could have been. It could have been just that he would get so excitable. But yeah, he has learned to drive with a steering device. So most of you have seen spinner knobs, I'm sure. Tractors, combines, some of that equipment has them on. And you can use a spinner knob or a suicide knob in that type of farm equipment. It is not legal to use a steering device without having the restriction from the state. So you can't just pop a steering device into a car and think, oh, this is great. You have to get that restriction placed on your license. Or if you don't and you get stopped, you can get a ticket for it. Just keep that in mind. Another thing I want to let you know, and I didn't realize this until I sat on a panel with an attorney and an insurance agent. But I think none of us really think about the fact that we as family members could also be liable if something happens when our loved one is driving. So I would be cautious. If you have concerns about your loved one driving, I would probably do everything I could to get them evaluated. Because if they're out driving and they have an accident where someone is hurt or killed, you can be taken to civil court as well. And it makes perfect sense. I never really realized it until I heard the attorney say that. So I would keep that in mind as well. Those are just some resources that I use. And that's me. So one of the questions here is an older person with car dents, etc., and then has TIAs. The doctor says driving is okay with short distances, but the family still has concerns. Now what? Well, number one, the doctor has to do their job in contacting the state to have a restriction put on their license for short distances. Sadly, most of the physicians in our areas don't even know that they have to deal with the state. That person that with the Parkinson's, where he said it was the best money he'd spent, neither one of the doctors that told him he couldn't drive took the steps that they were supposed to in order to have that person's license revoked. So he still had an active license when I worked with him. So I help the physicians go through the next process of either getting the restriction or getting a revocation of the license. So hopefully that answered that question. Where do you get adaptive equipment? Again, I would not be getting adaptive equipment for anybody unless they've gone through a comprehensive driving eval, and the person doing the evaluation will help get that equipment. There are a few dealers around that we feel confident with. They've been doing this for many, many years. I have never ordered something off of Amazon or eBay for a patient, and I will never. So the person doing the eval should be the one helping to get that equipment. Cost of the evaluation. The evaluation itself takes up to 2 to 3 hours, and my rate at this point is $400. Yes, it is self-pay because Medicare, in all their wisdom, has deemed that driving is not an important activity of daily living. So my thoughts on that is that, number one, everybody working in Medicare making the decisions, they live in urban areas, so they've got taxis and they've got Ubers and they've got buses and subways, or they even have their own driver. So of course it's not important to drive because you don't need to. They don't live in our areas. So that's very frustrating. So yes, it is a self-pay. My radius, I mean, I go almost anywhere, but if I have more than a 2-hour round trip, then I have to charge for my travel time. So that just all depends on where the person is. Hopefully I answered that question. The handlebar, seatbelt extension, and seatbelt assist. No, those type of equipment I do order from Amazon, or you can order it from a medical supply store. That stuff doesn't have any liability to it. The things that I would not order are the changing the original manufacturer's equipment, such as the left foot accelerator, hand controls, even the spinner knobs. I won't order just from anywhere. But the other things, the old pictures that I showed you, they can get somewhere else. Any other questions, comments?
Well, thank you, Joy, for your education on this. We've all felt that it was very educational. I think it's very good. You have one more question out there. Well, a couple more now. One more.
Do OTs in general do the same driving evals? No. In order to do comprehensive driving evals, you need to have advanced training. So a generalist OT, which you'd find in inpatient, acute care, inpatient rehab, outpatient, they're all generalist OTs, and they can do kind of screenings so that they can be seeing, is the person safe to continue driving, or do they need to retire? Now, there's a great little form that has been developed by some of the certified driving evaluators. It's awesome. And I usually try to give that out to my OT departments that I work with. And it's like a stoplight. So you've got red means this person needs to stop now. They don't need to be referred to me. Green, there's not any major issues that are noticed, so they can keep driving. It's the yellow where there's questions about different things, and that's when we need to be referred to a specialist. So OTs can assist with the initial part of it, but no, they should not be doing the comprehensive, nor the behind the wheel. And our governing board is AOTA. And even they, in all of their papers, state that if you haven't had advanced training in driving rehab, you should not be in a car with somebody who is questionable. How do I make sure the OTs I work with have that tool? Can you contact me and I can get it to you? There was another question that asked about states. There are comprehensive driving evals in every state. Some of the areas are like we are here, where there's very few people that are trained to do the evaluations. Some of them are in much more populated areas, so there's more options. So yes, every state has them. It just depends on your location in the state. And does Courage Kenny provide the comprehensive driving evaluation as well? Yes, I think they have 5 different locations that they do driving evaluations. You'd have to go on their website to find out for sure. I haven't looked at it in a long time, so I can't tell you for sure where their locations are, but I think there's 4 or 5. And they're excellent too. But it's and I don't know what type of waiting list they have. So that would be something to think about. Any others? I could talk about driving for hours. Let me see if I can click on this form. If I can open it. I just opened things on my own computer with that. I'm not sure what form that is. If you can send me that request for examination of driving, whatever, I can tell you if that is still valid or not.
So you would prefer to either one, either the Joy Tanberg or the WWW, either one?
Go to Joy Tanberg at backmandriving.com.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much too. And if anyone has any further questions, they can contact you.
Yep. I'll
Great.
put my email address in here. Hopefully that was right. And my phone number is 701-330-4445. So feel free, if you have questions, contact me and I can help you work through them.
Well, again, this was very educational and I want to thank you for your time and everyone else too. That was great.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate the opportunity. Like I said, I like to talk about driving.